I'm not gonna lie, I was legit scared to make this video. The reason being, I simply do not understand this killer. Not because I'm stupid or something, though some people will probably argue this, but because almost no one understands this killer, because almost no one plays them. Well, except for maybe Dozy when he used to make DBD videos and that girl at Zdarva interviewed recently. But in the light of the recent buff, I just couldn't help but cover twins as part of my old versions of series, so I guess you're gonna have to bear with my shallow understanding of this killer. The twins PTB was announced on the 10th of November 2020, and it was the second PTB after the Spirit that I actually tried myself. That's how much I like the idea of playing a killer that was two different characters. It almost felt like BHVR decided to give us something they didn't have the time or knowledge to implement with the Legion. Since at that time I was an active Left 4 Dead 2 player, my initial reaction to the twins was, "Ayo! That's Jockey from Left 4 Dead!" Which made me even more excited. So I downloaded the PTB, played several games as the killer, cause that's all I managed to find over the course of like an hour, realized that it wasn't enough to draw any conclusions, and went to sleep cause the next day I had to get up early. But I guess other people had more time for testing, cause the next morning I woke up to the DBD YouTube absolutely molding about how unplayable the twins were. Basically, it turned out that when designing their power, BHVR made the same mistake as with Plague and gave survivors complete control over when you got to use it. The thing is, on the PTB there was no way to recall Victor after he successfully latched onto a survivor. So once it was attached to someone, it was solely up to them to decide whether to wiggle him off and let him go or leave him on the back and pretty much keep your power hostage. As you've probably guessed, a lot of people preferred the second scenario. Yes, this way they couldn't progress the game much, cause being ridden by Victor made them incapacitated, but ultimately it was still worth it, cause it allowed the rest of the survivors to do gens safely without having to worry about dodging the little fucker every 10 seconds. Yeah, you could forcefully get Victor back by downing the cheeky bastard who stole him, but that's provided that you could find them at all, cause back then Victor wasn't trackable through the white aura and he didn't mark the survivor he was riding with killer instinct, so the only way to find them was either accidentally run into them or hope that they would pass by one of their teammates and Victor will reveal their position with killer instinct. This strat proved to be so efficient that pretty soon coordinated sweep groups started abusing the hell out of it. They would deliberately send their best looper to be the dedicated Victor holder, and at that point you were caught between a rock and a hard place. If you wanted your power back, you had to go for the best looper, who even being injured could still waste quite a bit of your time, and if you chose to ignore them and went for other people instead, you kinda just accepted the fact that you were an M1 killer for the rest of the match. The biggest f*** you in this situation was that if the person with Victor on their back actually managed to keep him there all the way until the exit gates were open, they could escape through them without even having to shake him off first. Technically, it wasn't supposed to be a thing, cause on the PTB there was already a mechanic that blocked the exit gates for any survivor carrying Victor that got close to the escape line. But the problem was that the devs didn't account for the fact that when you downed them as Charlotte, Victor immediately returned to you and the survivor's falling animation automatically pushed them past the entity blocker, causing them to escape. And that's not even to mention that on top of it, you could literally hijack Victor through the hatch. But hey, complaining about this would be a little hypocritical, considering that the same can still be done with the pig's traps, and she's been in the game for much longer. But all this was a problem only assuming that you could hit someone with Victor in the first place, which believe me wasn't that easy, because on the PTB Victor didn't have the ability to search lockers. In fact, he couldn't interact with them at all, so any survivor entering a locker became completely invulnerable to him. And the only way to counter it was to switch back to Charlotte, go to the locker and grab them like all killers do. But one thing about twins is that normally when you're using Victor, Charlotte is standing somewhere on the other side of the map. It kinda just happens naturally when you play this character. And because of this, you almost never had enough time to reach the right locker before survivors went away to another spot where there were more lockers, and you had to do the whole thing again and again and again and again until you suddenly realized that you were on mid-witch, and that's when you lost all hope in the humanity. On top of it, Victor felt super clumsy to use in general. For example, while charging his pounce attack, his movement speed would go from 6 meters per second, which is his normal running speed, to just 2, making him exactly twice as slow as survivors. To make it worse, the speed loss happened much quicker than today, in just 0.25 seconds. So basically, once you hit M2, you instantly lost your ability to walk and still had to wait for almost 1 second until your pounce was fully charged and you could actually attack. Next, Victor couldn't move during the cooldown of successful pounce attacks that didn't make him latch onto a survivor. Like for example, if they were injured and you downed them, or if they had endurance and you gave them deep wound. By itself, it was nothing game-breaking, but what you should keep in mind is that successful pounce attacks work exactly like missed ones, leaving Victor vulnerable equal to being crushed. Combine these two things together and you get a pretty sad picture, where if you got someone with a pounce and another survivor wanted to punish you for this with a boot in the face, you couldn't even try to back away to make it a little more difficult for them. All you could do was just stand still and wait for the inevitable. To BHVR's credit, they were able to foresee this problem and therefore made the pounce cooldown last only 3 seconds. Though truthfully, this didn't help the situation much. The only objectively good thing about the PTB twins was the fact that Charlotte didn't lose her collision when you left her dormant for some time, meaning that you could strategically put her so that she body blocked a pallet, window, or even a doorway, and therefore denied survivors a potentially safe loop or quick access to a hooked teammate. Wanna know what she can't deny though? Your ability to subscribe to my channel and be one of the first to watch my videos on old DBD. You have exactly 3 seconds to do it, or else my bestest friend Matthew Cote will turn Victor into an add-on. Aside from the gameplay, there was one more thing about twins that the community couldn't come to terms with, namely the fact that Victor was a baby. While some people were having fun kicking him in the face and joking about how BHVR introduced a literal baby killer, others were posting angry comments on Reddit and Twitter explaining that it was morally wrong and that BHVR promoted child abuse. Luckily, the devs saw this coming, and to calm everyone down, conveniently specified in the twins' backstory that they were 300 years old. Care feel bad for the little gremlin if he was born before dinosaurs. After the PTB was over, BHVR had about 20 days to figure out how to actually make their new killer work. The backlash from the community was so strong that no one had any doubts that the upcoming changes would be absolutely massive. However, when the twins DLC finally dropped, what the community actually received was an absolute nothing burger. The first issue the devs addressed was keeping Victor hostage. To fix it, they allowed you to recall Victor after having been on the survivor's back for 45 seconds. 45 seconds! It was like a slap in the face! Cause think about it, an average DBD match lasts about 10 minutes, and if every time you used Victor, survivors decided to hold him for the maximum possible time, you would only be able to pounce on someone 13 times tops. And that's not including all the potential misses and the time you need to find the next survivor and get a good angle for an attack. And I guess subconsciously BHVR realized all this. At least that would explain why they also reworked the speeding top add-on. It's just on the PTB it used to increase the time it takes to wiggle Victor off, which even with the 45 seconds recall timer wouldn't be very useful, because it would simply make you wait for your power longer while giving survivors even less incentive to get rid of Victor. And that's why it was changed into making survivors drop items after being hit with a pounce. But if that was really their intention, I don't understand why they didn't do the same with Sewer Sludge, which to this day does exactly the same. But it is what it is, I guess. Next, the devs increased Victor's maximum movement speed while charging the pounce from 2 meters per second to 2.4. Theoretically, it was supposed to be a good thing, because it would allow you to not fall behind so much during the chase. However, for this, twins mains had to sacrifice the time it takes them to reach this speed, which went from 0.25 seconds to 0.75. Seems like a harmless nerf, but the problem was that at that time the default duration of the pounce charge was exactly 1 second, meaning that you benefited from the 2.4 meters per second for only 0.25 seconds, which was pretty much nothing. But the most disappointing thing about this patch wasn't what the devs did, but rather what they didn't do, because for some reason they chose to ignore the fact that twins' power was completely neutralized by lockers, which the community didn't stop reminding them even for a second. 1 week later, they finally heard the complaints and released one more patch aimed to fix this issue. Naturally, because of Victor's small size, it was impossible to make him grab survivors from lockers himself. That would just look stupid. So instead, they made him trap them inside and reveal their position and the position of anyone nearby through killer instinct, so that Charlotte could get there and grab them herself. The survivor would remain trapped for 10 seconds, after which they would break free, recalling Victor to Charlotte. This finally put an end to the twins' war with lockers and made their power somewhat of a threat to survivors. One more week later, in patch 4.4.2, the devs realized that making people wait for 45 seconds to be able to recall Victor was a little too much, so they reduced this time to just 30 seconds. And that was what finally made survivors stop trying to keep Victor hostage, because they knew that in the best case scenario, they would be able to block him for only 20-25 seconds max, and that was just not worth the hassle. This version of twins is the one that I was using when I was recording the footage for this video, because truthfully, that's the only version of old twins that I have access to at the moment. So much for playing old versions, huh? But hey, at least I can actually confirm that this version of twins was more or less playable, which was probably the reason why after this patch BHVR decided to leave them be for about half a year. In the spring of 2021, they returned with some fine-tuning. First thing they did was allow Victor to move during the cooldown of successful pounce attacks that didn't cause him to latch onto a survivor. Naturally not at full speed, so that survivors could still kick him if they had a good reaction, but fast enough to make it a little more challenging for them. To compensate for this new ability, the devs increased the duration of the cooldown to 5 seconds, which was sad but still worth it in my opinion, because this way it just felt like you had more control over your character. Next, the devs allowed you to turn the camera immediately after switching from Victor back to Charlotte. Sounds a little confusing, I understand, because how else can the camera possibly work? Well, that's how. Again? Wait. Switch back. It's not moving. It's not moving. Like here, look. I'm gonna be twitching left and right after I switch, okay? And you're gonna see how much time that actually is. So I'm switching back. Now. Only now. Basically, before this update, whenever Charlotte woke up from the dormant state, for the first several seconds, her camera was locked in one position, which meant that if someone was behind you, you wouldn't be able to do anything to them, because to get them, you would have to chase them backwards, using only your WASD keys. And I don't know what's crazier to me in this situation, to think that it was an intended feature and someone manually programmed it, or that it was a bug and it somehow went unnoticed for 6 months. To the disappointment of many, in this patch, the devs also made Charlotte lose her collision 30 seconds after entering the dormant state, so that she could no longer permanently block the access to certain areas on the map. Technically, this change was beneficial for both sides, because now you could also walk through Charlotte as Victor. But the truth is that this quote-unquote benefit was nothing compared to what was taken from Twins in return, so I think it's fair to say there was a nerf. It still allowed you to use Charlotte for blocking loops, because you don't really need more than 30 seconds for this, but I guess Twins mains got so upset with this change that they stopped doing this at all. Well, at least I can't remember when I last saw anyone try to pull this off with me. And there you go, that was the version of Twins we were stuck with for about 4 years. I'm using the word stuck here because for some reason the absolute majority of players were extremely dissatisfied with this killer during this period, to the point that literally no one wanted to play them. I swear, you could play Survivor every day for several weeks and run into Twins only once. And to be honest with you, I never really understood why. I mean, Victor's pounce is a super powerful tool. He's insanely fast, barely goes on cooldown, allows you to control 2 sides of the map, makes camping and slugging extremely easy. It's like, what else do you need? Someone from my Discord server told me that it was the Twins' janky and awkward controls that people had problems with. However, when I was playing them for this video, I didn't notice any of that, so I guess I'm gonna continue thinking that the community just collectively gaslighted itself into believing that the old Twins were completely unplayable. Aside from some random bug fixes, the only thing that changed about Twins over these 4 years were 7 of their add-ons. I'm not gonna go through every single one of them like I normally do, because for the most part the changes done to them were so minor that it's not even worth mentioning, but there was one specific add-on that caught my attention, namely Iridescent Pendant. Today it makes survivors exposed for 45 seconds after crushing Victor when he's idle. Pretty solid if you ask me, because it gives you a good chance to reach the one-shot survivor in time. Originally, you'd be lucky if you got it to work at all. Alright, I'm kicking. Let's go. Ooh, that's super close though. Can you make it? 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 Uh-huh. Very useful add-on, by the way. About a month ago, BHVR finally stopped pretending that Twins didn't exist and decided to do something about their absolutely non-existent peak rate. For this, they announced a new PTB with a massive buff of their power, a buff that made everyone's jaw drop. In case you didn't have a chance to try this PTB yourself, here's a TLDR. First, the devs made it so that Victor's pounce attack no longer latched onto healthy survivors. Instead, it became a variation of Demogorgon's Shred, injuring them for 1 health state. However, if they were already injured, on top of downing them, it would actually get Victor attached to them right on the ground. While he was on the survivor's back, their teammates couldn't help them recover. For this, they had to either crush Victor or wait for 20 seconds till he returned to Charlotte automatically. And it was absolutely wild, because adding this in the game was pretty much equivalent to openly inviting killers to slug. In fact, technically slugging was now the only way to play Twins, because it was just how their power worked by default. On top of it, as long as Victor was attached to a dying survivor or had them trapped in a locker, Charlotte had a 10% haste effect which disappeared only when she hit someone. I get it that it was done so that she didn't have to struggle as much when trying to reach a downed survivor on the other side of the map, but indirectly it just gave her even more motivation for leaving people on the ground, because chasing people people with a massive speed bonus was just too tempting. And there's just no way I'm gonna believe that Behavior didn't see all this coming. No, it was actually their goal to rewire twins for slugging, because how else can you explain that even their add-ons were now perfect for this? I'm talking about the Sewer Sludge rework, which now decreased the survivor's scroll speed by 25% when Victor was attached to them. It could have been even worse if the devs didn't take away Victor's ability to reveal the position of the nearby survivors through Killer Instinct when he was sitting on someone, because in this case it would be like the game was directly inviting you to chase someone else instead of picking up the already down survivor. But thank God they were smart enough to remove this feature. However, slugging was not the only issue with the new twins, because they were now also much better at camping. You see, originally when you were near hooked survivors, the game didn't allow you to unbind Victor or switch between him and Charlotte if he was already unbound. The reason for this was pretty obvious, so that you couldn't blatantly face camp survivors by leaving one of the characters near the hook. On the PTB though, the switching restriction was removed, meaning that you could now walk away from the hook, spawn Victor, put him in front of the hook, switch back to Charlotte and go look for other survivors. If someone approached the hook to rescue the survivor, Victor would immediately give away their presence through Killer Instincts so that you could switch back to him and prevent it from happening. Yeah, I guess you could say that it wasn't that bad, cause leaving Victor idling for too long automatically recalled him to you. And if you left Charlotte there, it would just straight up allow them to unhook themselves thanks to the anti-camping mechanic. But I don't know, man, even with this in mind, this change still seemed completely outrageous. By the way, did anyone understand why in the patch notes it said that switching near hooks was supposed to be happening at a slower rate? I mean, I checked it multiple times and every time the switching speed seemed the same. The only difference I noticed was this.
So, my job is to switch right now. I guess. Oh my god, why am I so slow? Finally, is this a bug? I am still super slow. I guess that's the punishment they were talking about.
But if that's what they meant, they clearly should have worded it better. The only nerf twins received on the PTB was the increased cooldown for Victor to come back after being crushed. It went from 6 seconds to 10. However, as big as the sleep was, in reality it didn't matter, because the new Victor almost never had to go on cooldown in the first place. The thing is, the devs made it so that he couldn't be kicked after he injured someone with a pounce, only if he missed it. So if your aim was on point and you hit most of your pounces, you simply left survivors no chance to ever crush you, and thus you never had to deal with the long cooldown time. It was pretty offensive even by itself, because it allowed you to go on literal hit-and-run sprees, injuring survivors left and right. But Behavior just had to make it worse by reworking Iridescent Pendant into increasing Victor's and Charlotte movement speed by 2% every time Victor injured someone with a pounce. The maximum speed bonus was capped at 8% and was lost as soon as you downed someone. To give you an idea how efficient it made Victor, it basically allowed him to injure survivors like twice faster than they could possibly heal. In my opinion, its Darva summed it up perfectly.
You just get pounded. It's almost like you're playing against 3 killers, you know?
Yeah.
And they're just taking turns like...
But wait, there's more? Because on top of all this, Twins Power also received an overall facelift. That's how the time it takes to switch back to Charlotte was decreased from 3 seconds to 1.5, the time to unbind Victor was decreased from 1 second to 0.75, and the time to charge a pounce was decreased from 1 second to 0.85. But most importantly, as Charlotte, you were now allowed to recall Victor anytime you wanted. Jesus Christ, why do such obvious things take Behavior years to implement? The list of changes doesn't end here. But there's no point going through the rest of them, because first, they're not that interesting, and second, most of them never made it to the live servers anyway. Why? Because Behavior received so much shit over this new version of Twins that they had no choice but to call off 90% of everything they had changed about them. Now, what exactly carried over to the live version of the game? First and foremost, all the minor number tweaks I've listed before. That is, the increased speed of switching back to Charlotte, unbinding Victor, and charging his pounce, along with the longer Victor cooldown after being crushed. Second, 3 quality of life updates. Victor's grunts being detected by the visual terror radius, him glowing red when he's vulnerable to being kicked and white when not, and of course the ability to recall him on button. Out of the 7 changes done to the Twins add-ons, Behavior decided to keep only 2. Tiny Fingernail, which was nerfed to decrease Victor's unbind time by 33%, and Toy Sword, which now decreases the pounce charge time by only 10%. To put it simply, the devs went through the entire changelog and scratched every single new feature related to Victor, leaving only those changes that seemed the safest and least ambitious. this. But if they expected it to calm the community down, they were wrong. In fact, in a way it became even worse, because it made players feel stupid for wasting almost a week of their time testing something that wasn't even gonna be in the game. Initially, I was absolutely furious about it too, because by that time I had already started scripting this video, and it forced me to go back and rewrite a huge chunk of it. But you know what? After some time, when I was able to take a more sober look at the situation, I kinda changed my mind. I mean, think about it. All these 4 years, people have been complaining about how Twins' power was clumsy, awkward, unsatisfying to use, and so on. So wasn't this update exactly what the Twins main needed? Yeah, it didn't give us anything fundamentally new, and all this hassle could have easily been avoided if before rolling out the PTB, the devs consulted at least someone who actually played Twins. But at the end of the day, who cares? PTBs are for content creators and nerds like myself. Most of the active player base probably didn't even know something big happened to Twins there. So maybe it was for the better, because at least now you get to play versus this killer more than once a year. I don't know if that's a good thing though, considering what kind of killer this is, but that's a topic for another video.